Thank you. Good afternoon again, everyone. I am appreciative for those who have been able to stick with us. And as was noted, I learned how big a country Russia is the first time I had to make a flight from the Russian Far East to Moscow. And an 8.5 or 9 hour flight, and not even covering the whole country. It's a big airspace, even bigger than Alaska. So really impressive. Okay, so this presentation is going to be a recap of the outcomes of the recent 39th Assembly and the Air Navigation Work Program resulting from the Assembly that goes into from this year through 2019. ICAO's 39th Assembly was an historic event. 2,200 participants from around the world participated, the largest number ever, from 185 states. That included member states, non-member states, and 56 observer organizations. There was significant and far-reaching progress achieved in all 5 of ICAO's strategic objectives for targets and approaches that are being pursued, notably including environment, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Turning first to safety, the endorsement of the GASP that I spoke of earlier set our strategic direction for our technical work. The new edition maintains the focus that was established 3 years prior and helps us to have specific objectives on the continuation of safety management system implementation, work with state regulators on state safety program implementation, which is really hard for the implementation by the regulators, including safety performance measurement. Work to develop safety performance indicators and continue evolution towards predictive risk management once SMS has been introduced within operators and other stakeholder entities. Endorsement of continuation of our comprehensive regional implementation plans in Africa and beginning in beyond 2016, work in other regional offices to develop similar plans, including a plan for the Middle East where traffic has grown so rapidly and has had a big impact on some of the states that are not as well prepared to manage their safety and air traffic. And finally, there was appreciation for many of the items that were raised a year and a half earlier at ICAO's high-level safety conference, and the work that came out of the safety conference was endorsed by the Assembly for integration into our further program. And finally, ICAO was asked to take on a more operational response role after crises, either disasters, humanitarian crises, so that we could assist states and other organizations that are involved in recovering social society after those events. On the air navigation front, for capacity and efficiency, the GAMP was endorsed. You've heard a lot about that today from Salo and Irwin. The enhancements include in the ATM logical architecture, this notion of a minimum path for equipage for a particular kind of airspace, the performance-based approach that you've heard a lot about today, and consideration of financial aspects of implementation. Not doing an implementation just because we can, but doing it because it will have a positive financial impact. And finally, there was an urge to continue the implementation of performance-based navigation and to acknowledge the need for another air navigation conference in 2018 for the next set of big decisions. In security and facilitation, there was an endorsement to commence development of an implementation plan for security similar to what we already have for safety and air navigation. It will provide direction to all entities involved in aviation security enhancement with a focus on internationally agreed goals and targets. There was endorsement of the following within the aviation security and facilitation program: new and emerging threats, including cybersecurity, landside security, and insider threats all have to be addressed in the work program. Technical assistance needs to be strengthened within the regional coordination frameworks. The adoption of the first ever cyber security resolution, which stresses the importance of information sharing among states and stakeholders and coordination across civil aviation safety and security fields of expertise to address this area of risk. And it's one of the first things we'll have to do is define what some of this means, because when we say cybersecurity, that means different things to different people, and educating the different stakeholder communities is going to be step one. There were priorities established within the facilitation program and the ICAO Traveler Identification Program, including travel documents, the ICAO Public Key Directory Program, and the provisions of the related assistance and training to states were all endorsed. There was continued support for the Universal Security Audit Program's continuous monitoring approach, including by seconding from states short and long-term experts to be participating in training courses and regional seminars to get the word out within the states on how these programs operate. And there was support for the creation of a comprehensive regional implementation plan for security and facilitation in the Middle East. Within the economic development strategic objective, there was a need, again, to develop an ICAO Global Air Transport Plan, essentially a roadmap for economic strategies. There was endorsement of an action plan for the finalization of international agreements for the liberalization of market access, air cargo, and air carrier ownership and control. There was endorsement of the action plan for further customization of long-term traffic forecasts for global and regional forecasts and for aviation personnel training and needs to meet the requirements of the ICAO Next Generation of Aviation Professionals program. And I note that program specifically in its relationship to the Air Navigation Fund, because I think activities like the fund are going to become increasingly important as we design recruitment and attraction methodologies to recruit young people into aviation, because aviation is competing with many other job opportunities for the young generation, and we need to continue to attract the best and the brightest into these fields. We need to promote the strengthening and partnership in the areas of data sharing and analysis with the UN, with its agencies, with international and regional organizations, and with academia to increase financing and investment for the development of air transport activities. The Assembly said to increase awareness and promotion of various updated policy guidance and tools, and increase awareness of ICAO's long-term vision for air transport liberalization and customer protection. And finally, an emphasis on increased awareness and promotion of the tools for analysis that can be jointly developed by ICAO's partners. Now the most newsworthy of the items that happened at the Assembly occurred around the environmental protection objectives. There was an endorsement of a global market-based measure, the first ever market-based measure adopted by an entire global industry sector related to carbon reduction and climate change. There was recognition of the ongoing work to develop a new supersonic noise standard for future aircraft, and that the possible certification of a supersonic airplane in the 2020 to 2025 timeframe should be supported by ICAO if the necessary technology is brought forward by manufacturing and state authorities. There was recognition of the development of a new non-volatile particle material emission standard for all turbofan and turbojet aircraft with a rated thrust greater than 26.7 kilonewtons. I had to actually look up kilonewtons to make sure I had said that right. That means that essentially all medium to large aircraft have to meet these requirements. There was support for ICAO's aspirational goals on CO2 emissions reduction and recognition of progress on all elements of the basket of measures to combat climate change. So beyond the market-based measures, we already have avenues of work in technology, engine improvements, reduction in laminar flows, and other technical improvements, including air navigation efficiency improvements, to reduce the overall carbon footprint for an individual passenger or ton of cargo. There was recognition of new global CO2 standards for new type and in-production aircraft, and Vince talked about that earlier. And there was a welcome for the partnership agreement between ICAO and Airports Council International to help make airports greener in their operations. Other highlights from the Assembly include an endorsement of our No Country Left Behind initiative for it to be continued. We encourage states to contribute to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals through the implementation of the strategic objectives, and the Assembly directed ICAO to further assist member states to enhance their air transport systems and ensure that no country is left behind so that all can foster sustainable development and benefit from improved air connectivity. The Assembly endorsed the Next Generation of Aviation Professionals program and highlighted the work of ICAO to create greater awareness of the impending shortage of personnel globally, and also to promote gender equality in the hiring within aviation. The Assembly also recognized adoption of an amendment to Annex 9, which includes provisions for states to establish legislation and regulations in support of assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families. This is guidance material and a recommended practice, but essentially it's a strong encouragement for states to take the actions that are outlined. There was endorsement that the ICAO work on the development and implementation of technical assistance to states under their respective strategic objectives, working with our member states, international and regional organizations, and the industry. And finally, recognition that the ICAO Technical Cooperation Program in TCB continue to be a permanent priority activity of the organization and one of the main instruments of ICAO to support states to remedy deficiencies and implement improvements in the field of civil aviation. And lastly, we're going to increase the membership in the ICAO Council from 36 member states to 40 member states after at least 90 states ratify that convention. And the size of the Air Navigation Commission will increase from 19 members to 21 members after that same ratification. So I'm out of breath talking about all of this. And after the slides that you just saw from Mr. De Silva, with all of the activities that are outlined over the next 5 years, you can see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And we won't do it at ICAO. What we will do is we're going to work to organize that activity and to assist the states and the industry to make that happen. So the Assembly validated that ICAO is on the right track. We weren't surprised by the outcomes that came from the Assembly. And that's principally because we have adopted this life cycle of activity that, starting at the top, starts with analysis and assessment of our needs, and then to the development of these global plans that we've been speaking about, and then to develop the specific standards and recommended practices necessary for those plans to become successful, to develop implementation planning for those standards, and then again to measure the performance of the entire global community at actually introducing and maintaining safety, efficiency, security, and environmental sustainability. That is a major change in the workflow of the organization, and it has really become much more responsive for the states who are engaged in it. So we're starting that process over now, and we've talked to you about how we're beginning the next round of global plan development by analyzing the needs in 2017 that we currently have. So much of the work that we do today and that's planned for the future is already in our safety plan and navigation plan. The newly endorsed revisions provide the strategic enhancements for the states and the industry to continue to adjust to the environment based upon the inputs we've already had. And every year now, ICAO publishes an annual report which describes some of the achievements, certainly not all because we can't capture them all, that are being seen around the world. And we're looking for inputs from the states on their accomplishments so that they can be included in this catalog. So as you or your colleagues become more familiar with this methodology, helping the Russian Federation report on its achievements so that they can be included would be a noteworthy outcome that helps to promote the activities that you're doing today. We also use the information that we are gathering through data collection and big data analysis to create tools for supporting implementation planning. One of the gentlemen earlier asked a very specific question about which runways had performance-based navigation assigned to them in Russia. That kind of analysis and data is data that we are continuing to make available to the states and to the industry through our automation platforms and our data analysis tools so that they can essentially plan priorities for what's the most important thing to tackle within their own environment and facing their own circumstances. A state that has an airport and an air navigation system but does not operate any aircraft, maybe an island in the Pacific or a tourist destination, that might be a state that doesn't need to focus on airworthiness or flight operations in its standards improvements. It would focus on its runways, its airports, its air navigation. And tailoring their improvement plan is a big part of what we're trying to do in our implementation strategy. To help get the word out, we're out developing some seminar activities around the world. Some of those are listed on this slide, and I don't expect you to read them all now, but you'll see them when you can download the entire presentation later. But activities like this, or even coming to a symposia like we've done today in this forum, is one of the ways that ICAO is trying to engage with the community and help people understand how they can interact with a fairly large and complex program. Now lastly, we can't forget the future. We're already working on current and emerging issues like cybersecurity, safety and resilience, remote piloted aircraft, and a new problem which we haven't talked about earlier is cross-border transfer of aircraft from one country to another, from one national register to another national register. Vince talked earlier about the fact that there are roughly 30,000 transport aircraft operating in the world today. What most people don't know, though, is that almost half of those aircraft are leased by the airline that flies them. They're owned by a finance company somewhere else, and the aircraft is leased to the airline. The airline operates the aircraft for several years, but at the end of the lease, the aircraft frequently leaves one country and goes to another country to be certified and flown by another airline. The process of moving that aircraft is very expensive and cumbersome, and we're working with the states to make that more efficient because A, it makes it less expensive for the passenger who ultimately buys a ticket. And B, it improves safety because the states involved, the state overseeing the aircraft the first several years and the state that's going to oversee the aircraft later, they have a higher opportunity to understand each other and to trust one another in the transfer of the aircraft than they do without this work. And finally, probably the most exciting issue is how we integrate commercial space into the air navigation system, because we do see an increasing interest and tempo in these activities. So before I end my presentation, I want to ask a simple question. How do we work together with you more effectively so that all of this work can progress and be seamless for the operator who operates within Russian Federation airspace and other airspace on the same flight? That's really the interest of ICAO, is to make the airspace appear to be seamless and interoperable for the operator in the air and for the pilot who is trained to fly the airplane. So I'm interested in your feedback, either in the forum or afterwards, when you'll have our contact information, to hear how we can do a better job of helping you help us. So with that, I'll end this presentation. And again, like my colleagues, I want to thank all of you for your enduring attention today on a very long day of presentations. And I want to thank the Air Navigation Fund for organizing and hosting this activity and for the wonderful facilitation throughout our visit. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Mr. Stephen, under my guidance, upon the order of the government, we are publishing the volume Arctic Regions of Russia, Exploration and Management of Russian Arctic. And here with us we have Oleg Saud, professor, wrote a big section of this volume on aviation management for this volume. Are you interested in this book? So I would like to hand it to you later on the year. Are you interested? Are you keen on?
I think we'd always be keen to understand what a major state like the Russian Federation is doing, particularly in a large airspace that is very international in its characterization. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And my second question. Back in 1972, on a billboard, I saw you on a poster that you managed aviation in Africa, and I managed aviation in Angola and Egypt. Our trails never crossed. Or I'm wrong. Just perhaps we met.
Well, I don't think I was actually working in Africa and living there, so that's probably why I missed you. But I traveled to Africa as part of the FAA responsibilities, perhaps a little bit after you did, sir. Thank you.
Спасибо.